Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday webinar with the Property Law Alliance. Our apologies for being a bit late. We had a bit of internet problems. But welcome, Solna and Bruno.
That's just a lie.
It is a lie. Hi, Marilee. Well, Bruno and I clearly take our, being honest and, those things very seriously as all attorneys. We were having an argument. That's where we were.
All right, but luckily
Bruno, you will have to elaborate on our argument. Otherwise, all our viewers is just going to be like, what?
Well, look, they might get a taste of it, so it'll be okay. It should be interesting, though. It's a very, very cool. It's a very cool debate, or at least a difference of opinion.
I like it.
Diplomatic now, yeah.
So all the viewers, you're gonna have to stay tuned tonight because we're gonna have a fun argument. It's the first time, Bruno. How long have you been waiting for us to have a difference in opinion? Like this is what
since March.
Yes, you've been waiting 16 episodes, and finally we disagree on something.
Nice.
Good luck, Marilee. May the force be with you, sister.
But how are you guys doing first?
Very good. And you?
Oh, no, good, thank you. All right. First, what I want us to discuss just briefly is that there was an amendment to the lockdown regulations, just regarding interprovincial travel, travel for leisure purposes and the curfew. I think we should just discuss that briefly. I don't know, Solna, do you maybe want to get started on that?
Yes, I'm happy to jump in, and I'll share my screen just now. So there was an amendment. So there was lockdown level 3 amended regulations on the 12th of July. I suspect the 11th of July was that unfortunate day where the words "with immediate effect" traumatized the entire South Africa. We're still not over it. It's almost, it's been a month now, and almost, yeah, it was. I still remember I wasn't ready. I drank like a lot of chamomile tea. Thank goodness. Imagine I drank a bottle of wine and then you said immediate effect. But that was the regulations that was published then on the 12th of July. At the back of that, again, taking the wine away and the curfew again. The original curfew then was from 9 in the evening until 4 in the morning. That's been changed from 10 in the evening to 4 in the morning. So at least now we have that extra hour. Hey, yay! We're happy, but we still don't have one. So I don't know what we do in that extra hour. I don't know about you guys. I think we're all just anyway in bed that early, because if you don't have wine, why are you awake anyway? Okay, so that's the one thing. So the curfew changed from 10 to 4, and then also something very important is there's always been a ban on leisure travel since the 16th of March. Am I right? That's where we are. 16th of March. No, the original lockdown from the 27th of March, no leisure travel was allowed at all, only travel for business purposes. And now with the regulations of the 31st of July, interprovincial leisure travel is allowed. So I am super jealous of the guys living in areas where they can go to the Kruger, or they can go to Bloberg, or they can go to, I mean, at least, guys, we have Gauteng.
Yeah.
We have the Lion Park. We're going to be okay. We're going to be fine. But so if you're in a province with nice leisure holiday destinations, we are jealous. The Gautengers, we might, we are definitely a little jealous there. But so that changed, and that's pretty significant. So I'll pause there, because I know there's a question on the back of that. Bruno, is there anything else on the amended regulations that I've missed now?
Sure. I don't think so. Give me a second. Let me see if there's anything interprovincial. Tour operators. And then obviously we're going to get to the accommodation side of it. Yeah, no, I think that's the most important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was about it. And that 10 o'clock curfew. Yay.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. All right, perfect. Then I think what we should discuss next is the question from Karen, which is with reference to the government gazette of last week and amended lockdown regulations on accommodation. What is the definition of short-term letting and how short is short?
How long is a rope?
Yeah. All right, I don't know if you maybe want to share your screen now.
I think, yes, so let's look at this. So Bruno, this is the topic that we've been arguing about. So the answer on, and I'll share my screen just now, I promise, but the answer on what is short-term rentals, the reason why we can't answer the question specifically is that is not a defined term in South African law. So I know that question comes from Karen, and I know I've answered this question for you over WhatsApp, and Bruno has as well. And I think you've seen sort of the same thing from both of us. The reason why we can't give a clear-cut definition is because there isn't such a thing in our law. In our law, we have a rental, and we know what rentals are. We know what the essentialia is of a lease agreement. We know what the law entails around that. But when it comes to the definitions of long-term rental, we have the answer, because long-term rentals are defined in terms of the Deeds Registry Act. You can register a 10-year lease agreement. A 10-year lease agreement is a long-term agreement. But so what is an agreement between 1 day and 9 years and 11 months and 30 odd days? You know, what is the in between? And that's why we are a little surprised with the use of the term short-term rentals, because it's an undefined term in our law, and it's undefined in terms of the lockdown regulations. So it's one of those where we're just saying, huh? But so let's look at the actual regulations. This is regulation, okay. Amendment of Regulation 39. Yes, hit me. I'll put my glasses on for the fight.
No. So maybe before we move on to that, because I think the one thing we do agree on, and now I'm trying to find where exactly our disputes lie, our points of disputes, and where there's common cause here. So I think
points in lemonade.
Yeah. So I think both you and I agreed that the length of time is very uncertain. The use of the word short term has created massive confusion, and a lot of people have asked me, including Karen from Smart Stay, what is it? Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Right?
Yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, and now this is just kind of a guideline to say, well, let's at least get on some kind of path. And the one thing that we discussed before that we did agree on is, if we can take some of our long-term rentals or our normal lease agreements, and we can make them month to month, and they still considered to a certain degree to be
a normal rental. Let's use the
a
term
normal rental. Yeah, exactly.
Rental. Okay.
So our month to months are normal. In my mind, then anything more than a month would, for the purposes of the regulations, not be short term. So yeah, okay. I think that's a nice point of departure, at least. So what are we saying about the 3 weeks one? Nothing. We don't have necessarily an answer for that, but we do know from the month to month ones, or at least rather a month, I think there we'd still be comfortable considering it to be a normal rental.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. What I'm struggling to understand, and I don't think it's necessarily I'm struggling to understand because I didn't drink my ginkgo biloba tea this morning. I think it's more the way the regulations are drafted. simply because if we look at the amended regulations now, where it says, so you're not allowed to, so we're talking to hotels, lodges, bed and breakfast, timeshare facilities and resorts and guest houses. There's a lot of answer, except, I'm sorry, but I would have used the comma there, but this is just my drafting, so let me not get weird about commas here. But and guest houses, except to the extent that these facilities are required for accommodation for somebody that's anyway now stuck where he is, work purposes, and I'll return to that one. Persons in quarantine or isolation, and then persons utilizing such facilities for intra-provincial leisure. Wait a minute. Why intra-provincial?
Inside the province?
Inter is out, intra is in.
Yeah.
Okay, inside. I just want to check something. Sorry, I'm picking up an interesting draft. Interprovincial. Okay, they do use the word inter. No, I just wanted to check if we have a bit of ambiguity happening there, but no, we don't. Okay, so for intra-provincial purposes, they can travel, but for leisure purposes. My thing is, Bruno, if we talk about short-term rentals, I do suspect that the intention of government here is to limit things like Airbnb, in the sense where you're going to rent out a room to one person, but also to another one, and obviously the risk is on. But why are bed and breakfasts then allowed? Why are guest houses allowed? Because what is the difference between me staying in a room? For instance, there's a guest house I usually go to when I'm in Cape Town, and it's like a house, like a normal house, and you just use one specific room. It's a guest house, but so they give you breakfast, yay, and they make your bed, but you share the house with other people. How is that different from an Airbnb? And the truth is, on the way the regulations are drafted, I can't say that I agree that that Airbnb falls outside of the scope of the allowed travel purposes, because if you travel for business, I'm very often an Airbnb user for business travel. That is definitely allowed. I can't see that it's excluded in terms of the regulations. But for leisure purposes, same story. So it brings us back to what is short-term rentals, because what Bruno pointed out, rightly so, is on the exclusions, it's always been short-term home sharing, letting, leasing, rental for leisure purpose. Now the for leisure purpose is gone. So Bruno's argument is that now none of these, no short-term home sharing, letting, or rentals will be allowed. However, my argument is, if I look at these regulations, you are allowed to travel for business purposes or leisure inside your province, and I don't think that Airbnb can be excluded. Short-term rental, in my head, Bruno, would be something, because it's not defined in any way. A short-term rental is then, I accept your argument on the Rental Housing Act and everything else talks about your periodic leases on a month-to-month basis. So anything less than a month could then be considered to be a short-term rental. But I have seen lease agreements for 2 weeks where a purchaser buys a property and he has to rent. So he's not going to unpack anything, but him and all his stuff moves into a property for 2 weeks. I don't think, unless the regulations specifically say that, I don't think that anything less than a month would be disallowed per se. I agree with you that anything more than a month, without any doubt, is allowed. But I can't wrap my head around it would be disallowed to rent a property for 3 days, because if you can do that for business, why not for anything else? And now they've removed that from the exclusions. the leisure part, which makes me think if you phrase it correctly and you make it appear to be more in line with your typical guest house setup, it could work. But please give your argument, especially on the side where you talk about hotels and guest houses being regulated by a different regulatory body.
So I think my concern is the fact that there is that level of ambiguity, and you touched on it from an interpretation perspective, and you're absolutely right. From an interpretation perspective, we start reading through and say, well, if it's excluded there and over here it's allowable, the intention might have been to allow intra-provincial for short term and then just have the general exclusion there. My concern, for example, is if we looked at the hotels, so if you scroll down to the table, hotels specifically mention, if I'm not mistaken, it specifically says interprovincial. If I'm not mistaken. So over there they're very, so over there they're very express. They're saying it's not allowed for interprovincial, but up at the top it says it is allowed for intra-provincial. So ultimately, if you're traveling outside, you're not allowed to use a hotel for leisure purposes. But if you're traveling inside the province, it's great. No worries, you're allowed to use it. But I almost feel, and this is where the problem comes in with the ambiguity, either it was just sheer laziness or intention, that short term, they just kept it quite just blatant and express. Short-term rentals are not allowed. And now if we go back to the 12th of July, when like you and I discovered all of a sudden, all of a sudden they removed it because they used to have it written there that says short-term rentals for leisure purposes are excluded. Now all of a sudden it's gone. So my understanding is on the 12th of July, somebody looked at this and said, wait, short-term rentals, no, not at all. Let's remove it. Let's remove it and say no short-term rentals. And so that's my concern with the short-term rental game, is they're being very express when it comes to it. Now, obviously, more than this, we can only look at things like news articles and people's interpretations of news articles. So everything that I'm saying from this point on can be taken with a pinch of salt or a level of speculation. But for instance, if I read some of the news articles being reported on, whether it's true or not, it speaks of there being processes that are going to be put in place, going through protocols submitted by Airbnb, which the department will take to the NCC. However, not all home sharing in South Africa is registered with Airbnb, so this is a concern that government has. Whether this is a proper quote or not, I'd have to check the sources. If I go to Airbnb's website, it speaks over here, we cannot believe that the intention is to deliver such a blow to South Africans. So this is, Airbnb was surprised to hear in a media briefing held 30th July, where Minister of Tourism announced interprovincial leisure travel is open, with one explicit exception, short-term rentals. So I suppose to a certain degree, everyone here, at least the writers of these two articles, are somewhat confused because their interpretation is it's not allowed at all. My off-the-cuff interpretation, when I read that specific table and the fact that the table just says short-term is specifically excluded, I also start getting worried because now it almost seems like they're intentionally saying home sharing is a bad idea. But your point is valid. How practical is that? Because there's a lot of short-term rentals that one does need to consider, especially when registrations aren't taking place, at ideal times, and you need to make a certain provisions open for it. It is a bit of a concern. So again, ambiguity, not really drafted well enough for us to, be able to formulate a proper opinion. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna stop sharing. My question is more now relating to contracting. Legislation interpretation. So if you consider the Interpretation Act, let's say for argument's sake, not for argument's sake, because it is a fact that the wording of the regulations in comparison to the table, it creates ambiguity. It is ambiguous. There's no two ways about it. So typically, your legislation will supersede your regulations. So say, for instance, the Rental Housing Act, if the unfair regulations should contradict any provision of the Rental Housing Act, the Act will supersede the regulation. Now, this is the basis for my interpretation as well, where my interpretation will be that the content of the regulations, the written regulations, supersede the content of the table. But at the same time, without putting anybody at risk, and I think I'm just going to put like a blanket extreme like indemnity on all of us here, is my interpretation would be you can definitely do Airbnb. I can't see that the regulations will limit you from that because of the issue with the undefined term being used, short-term rentals. So then basically it's almost like the interpretation rule of a contract must be interpreted against the drafting party. Similar to that one, I almost want to say, if you do Airbnbs and if that is your business model, the sanction that you're going to face by transgressing the lockdown regulations are definitely severe. In law, you are then committing a crime in terms of the National Disaster Management Act. But for the same argument, you're in the same position if you not wearing a mask. Please wear a mask, guys. It's just like, let's just common courtesy. But for argument's sake, if you're not wearing a mask in a public place, it's a similar transgression, and nobody's been arrested for that. So I don't think you'll be arrested, but at the same time, you don't want to be a person in a body corporate who's had their knife in for you all along, and this is like the one thing they're going to use. So my recommendation would be, Bruno, and now you're going to have to tell me if you sort of agree with me on this, because I can't see a specific exclusion that makes sense, that I can definitely say, guys, if your lease agreement is less than a month, it's not allowed. I can't see something like that. We're interpreting to definitely say, and Bruno, we are on the same page on this one, anything more than a month is allowed without any doubt. They we agree. Anything less than a month, if I were you on an Airbnb or any other kind of shorter than a month rental, would probably still do it, but I'm a bit of a cowboy. But just know that you are playing in a very gray area.
Sorry, Bruno, I think you're muted.
Sorry, happens all the
It
time.
happens. It happens to the best.
So I do have to agree. At least like the point of departure with the 1 month is something that people need to keep in their mind. So obviously, so my conclusion with it is the regulations specifically mention hotels. It specifically mentions open for leisure purposes. It doesn't mention short-term rentals. The table then goes and says short-term rentals and doesn't make provision for it at all. So it's an outright exclusion. So that's where my worry comes from, is that it's drafted in the table as outright and not mentioned in the regulations up at the top almost at all. So now from the risk perspective, we don't know what long-term is. We don't know what short-term is. But you know what? That's also gray areas. And we'll remember the funny thing with criminal conduct, and this is probably not like advice that's ideal to be given out in the open, but a lot of it has to do with intent, right? And intent to actually contravene the law. Yes, there's a lot of conduct that's criminal in nature just by doing without having that intention. But something like this, one does need to look at what the law says, and a person going in there saying, well, I didn't realize that 2 weeks, the 2 weeks was short or long term. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get away with it, because the judge will look at this, or the magistrate will look at this and say, no, 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 it's an outright contravention of the law. And I mean, knowledge of the law isn't an excuse. So at the end of the day, a contravention is a contravention. But your lack of intention actually does play a part when it comes to this. And truly not knowing is probably going to be something that a person can argue. And in our law, since there isn't an outright definition, we now need to consider whether we actually do know what long-term and short-term is. And we don't. We really don't know. So according to this webinar now, we're saying that 1 month you're safe. But is the intention of government to say, no, we actually mean like day by day? And what Solna mentioned earlier, that I mentioned, is why is there a difference between Airbnb and hotels and guest houses and bed and breakfast? And the only thing that really comes to mind is certain protocols that are put in place through governmental institutions to govern those type of establishments versus Airbnb that's totally privately run and has their own internal protocols. And after even speaking to Karen, the realization was Airbnb might actually be cleaner and better run and better functioning than a lot of the hotels and guest houses. But from this news article we just read, the problem is not every short-term leasing is Airbnb. So you can't count on those same protocols being applied across the board. And this is again where we left with. So what is long-term? What is short-term? Be very careful. Up to 1 month, you could open yourself up for issues. If somebody gets sick on your premises and starts blaming you for having had somebody there 2 days earlier, it could land up, it's not even just about your own conscience. The problem is you're letting people in and out, and they're going to want to know. And if they realize you've done something that's even remotely unlawful, you're going to need to try and account for it. So whether you take the risk or not, I suppose, is entirely up to you. There's no way to confirm it. You can't go to the police and ask them to stamp a document, because I doubt they would. If you can, go for it. That'll probably save you.
Yeah.
But I mean, what do you do? Can you go there and say 2 weeks? Is it okay? Stamp. There you go. I think it is going to be, it is just going to be one of those things. Hopefully get sorted out sooner rather than later. Until then, there just is no consensus. I'm sorry. This is just the one thing. 30 days plus, cool. Before that, it's a risk that you're taking.
I agree with you, Bruno. I think the one thing I just want to clarify again, when you talk about long-term rentals, it doesn't mean long-term rentals, because that is a defined term.
Okay,
we know what a long-term rental is, 10 years or more. Now, I know what you mean is not short-term, but I just want to make sure our viewers don't get confused, because a long-term rental is a defined thing as 10 years, but so for everybody, just keep in mind when Bruno refers to that. Look at me being the one defining your terms for you.
Thank you.
Tell your wife if you need me to be the interpreter. I can.
The facilitator or the mediator. I'm going to remember that.
I can be a translator. So I agree with you. So what we're saying is 30 days plus, definitely. A month plus, definitely. We're happy with that. That's not a short-term rental. If you are willing to be cowboyish, cool, but just be aware of the risks. I think that, no, I actually think it makes sense, Bruno. I think we came to a good solution here.
Yeah, I suppose. No one's happy, so yeah.
I think nobody's happy. Nobody is happy.
All right, thank you. And then Karen just commented to the video, which I just want to quickly read just for clarity's sake. Is it makes a lot of sense. Thank you. There are a lot of in limbo travelers being accommodated on a month-to-month basis via Airbnb or similar platforms. People having relocated and needing an interim place to live whilst they look for their own place. Then that would not be short-term. Is that what we say?
Yes. That's definitely what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying too, Bruno. See,
I
now
suppose,
we're happy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happier than you.
Agree. No, I'm glad to hear that. All right, perfect. I think then we can move on to the next question, which we received. It's from Hayden, which says a property was sold and the buyer took occupation before the registration. Yeah, the occupation was taken in April and the registration was in July. They identified a cupboard that was damp. It wasn't fixed at the time. Now it has been identified that it has termites. Seller has a quote, but to treat entire house. Is seller obliged only to repair and treat the damaged area or treat the entire house? All right, I think, Bruno, do you want to get started on that?
Great.
Bruno, you look so happy. Yay. See, now you are happy, and I am.
There's a bit of sarcasm with that, yes. It's not exactly the easiest answer. All right, so maybe if you try and move back and strip some of the things out of it, the content of the
termites, ideally.
See, that's the solution. That's where we're heading. So the content of the contract is going to be the first thing to consider. So it's virtually impossible to give outright advice on how to deal with this without knowing specifically who the seller was, whether something like the Consumer Protection Act applies, footstoots clauses, latent defects, patent defects, whether the seller was actually aware of it and didn't disclose it. So these are certain elements that always come into the picture. So when giving advice like this, we normally work off a couple of assumptions and we say, well, the seller probably didn't know. It's a private sale, so the contract didn't say anything. It probably does have a footstoots clause. And, let's assume something like the CPA doesn't apply. And situations like that do land up making the situation a little bit difficult because the termite infestation isn't limited to a small little area. It's rather large. So having a quote to fix, so the first question is, does the seller actually need to fix anything? And that's where the footstoots clauses come in. Does the contract, it's a latent defect. No one could see it. Well, sure, termite infestation is kind of difficult because, you would assume that people can see it, but I'm not an expert with that. So let's assume that you couldn't see it when you bought it, right?
Except, Bruno, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. They saw it, so it was recorded, but as damp. And I think this is where the issue comes in. So I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but
no.
So they definitely noticed that something wasn't lacquer, but they assumed it was damp, which is, well, the truth is damp and termites aren't really as far apart as I think the viewer that asked the question believes, because damp will never be limited to one cupboard. Also, damp to show in a cupboard and not on a wall is already like, this is why I'm saying get professional inspectors. But the thing is, damp that already appears in a cupboard means the party already saw it. But my question, Bruno, and then I'll leave you to carry on. My question is, if a party prior to conclusion of an offer to purchase were made aware or became aware of a defect, but misinterpreted the defect, and the parties agreed, because from the question, my assumption is the seller agreed to repair the damp. Okay, but now there's no damp to repair. Now my question is, and then interpretation of law of contract becomes relevant, because now the party performed by fixing the problem in that particular cupboard, whether it's damp or termites, the problem is solved. But now I'll leave it to you. I just wanted to interrupt
just throw
from
that
the
in,
side and just make it more difficult. And now I'll sit back. Can I get some popcorn?
Look, arguably, I would say, again, it goes down to the wording. If the contract says fix the cupboard, it means any reason why that cupboard would somehow be broken, it needs to be fixed. And you're not going to come right just with one termite infestation trying to fix that one cupboard. You might need to go a little bit further than that. Otherwise, it's not going to matter. You're never actually going to fix that cupboard. If it referred specifically to fix that damp, and there is no damp, I would say that the termite infestation is latent. No party actually knew about it. He would have fixed damp. It turned out not to be damp, so he doesn't need to fix it. And now the question arises, is termite infestation latent or not? And if it is, he might be able to escape it using footstools. It's one thought. It's probably an argument that somebody would try and raise. And I don't think there necessarily is a right or wrong answer. So that's, yeah, that's probably where I would go if I was going to try and be argumentative, is keep it latent, say, sorry, I didn't know there was a termite infestation, it's your problem. Nothing in the contract binds me to fix it. You're a registered owner now. CPA doesn't apply, footstools in the contract. Sorry, it's your issue.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Bruno. The thing is, unless it specifically says repair the cupboard and it makes no reference to damp, the fact that the damp turned out to be termites means it's a latent defect, and footstools clause will protect you. So in summary, I think the answer is the parties agree to something specific. So you have to go back to your agreement and see what the parties agreed to in terms of that particular contract with regards to that particular problem. But I think the statistical chances of them being that specific, Bruno, is pretty slim. So I think regardless,
fixed cupboard, and there you go. Yeah,
exactly. And the truth is, I think in all likelihood the termites will be the purchaser's problem. Are you in agreement on that?
Totally in agreement.
Sorry, purchaser. Sometimes we give nice answers.
Fair enough. Well, it depends
Not
who we give the
tonight.
answers. So the seller likes us, the purchaser not so much.
It's a pleasure, seller.
All right,
convincing.
All right, and maybe in a landlord and tenant scenario, the same thing. Who has the obligation to fix it if there's something in the premises, as opposed to the buyer and the seller? If it's a tenant and landlord situation, does it depend also on the lease agreement provisions, or is there something in the act that stipulates something about it? I don't know, Silna, do you maybe want to take this one?
So the unfair regulations to the Rental Housing Act specifically says that a landlord will be responsible for repair and maintenance of structural items of the property. But even things like electrical things, if it breaks, but it is as a result of the tenant's actions or inactions for that matter, that they are increased damage or damage because he didn't tell the owner or anything like that. For instance, he saw there was a bit of a leak. He's seen there was a bit of a situation on the ceiling. Didn't inform the landlord. The next moment, the entire ceiling gives in with the geyser on top of that. Then, even though it's something that would normally be a landlord obligation, could become a tenant obligation. Termites, I have never in my entire life, and I've done rentals exclusively for 12 years, and in all my time, I have never, ever seen a tenant bring termites into a premises. So termites will always fall. Okay, but that's a new one. I swear it could theoretically happen, but I can't see it happening. But in all likelihood, that will be a landlord obligation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Then it seems we don't have any more questions, and I think it is almost maybe the time we have this evening. Do you have anything to clarify or add to tonight's Wednesday webinar? I don't know, Bruno.
No, I'm all right.
I only, I only have a thank you, Bruno. That was a fun argument.
It was.
Even though
Very
I
collegial, no swearing.
yeah, but I hate an argument where there's no wrong or right answer, because then both parties leave feeling like,
Yeah, fair enough.
I didn't win.
Yeah.
But thank you, it
Fair
was fun.
No.
Perfect. Then thank you for everyone joining us this evening. And then if you have any questions, you can just post or comment it during the course of this following week. And then keep safe and well, not warm actually. It's not that bad anymore, the weather.
Yeah.
All right, and thank you so much, Solna and Bruno.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.